today. If you're not comfortable with being recorded, you may want to disconnect. We will post the recordings once the event is complete. It does go until 6 p.m. Central, so it may or may not be posted to you today, but they will be provided to you. With that said, Mike, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Yeah, this is my morning today. I'm a program manager from Azure Resource Manager team. So I joined the team last year, and prior to that, I work on Azure Stack. Give me 1 second, since my slide has a little auto jump. Let me try to fix that really quick. Okay, here we go. Okay, so today I'm gonna give you an overview about Azure Resource Manager. What are the things Azure Resource Manager focus, and how do we do it? So if you look at your cloud environment, there are three things from management plane that are super important. One is how do you deploy your application? Second one is once you deploy your application, there are going to be a lot of resources. What is the best way to organize them into manageable units? And the third thing important is how do we control access? How do we control the policies? So we have talked about a lot previously to say Azure allows you to gain flexibility, agility, but it also actually gives you great control for your cloud assets. So now let's take a look at what Azure Resource Manager is. So Azure Resource Manager is the management API for Azure. So we are aiming to provide a consistent management layer to a variety of clients, including Portal, Partial, CLI, Visual Studio, and other third-party tools. So this graph shows you where Azure Resource Manager is in the whole Azure software stack. So from the bottom, there are a lot of resource providers. So those resources are the ones you are using today, like websites, virtual machines, SQL, network, DocumentDB, etc. So all these resource providers are providing their resources through their endpoints, and the endpoint follows very strict resource provider contract, and that ensure it behaves the way Azure Resource Manager wants. And on the top, it is the Azure Resource Manager. So it uses AAD or ADFS as the authentication, and also expose a bunch of Azure Resource Management API. So all the REST API on the management plane are actually provided by Azure Resource Manager. So whenever a request comes, so we'll validate the request, make sure you have permission to do the management action, and then we'll route the request to individual resource provider you're going to talk to. So, whoa, why this happens again? Yeah, 1 second, let me fix this. Okay. It doesn't actually let me do this. Sorry for that. Okay, works now. Sometimes PowerPoint is just too smart for me to understand. So we previously have talked about the three focus area for Azure Resource Manager: deploy, organize, and control. Of course, deployment is the most important thing people are asking, because you are using Azure to run your application. Of course, you are gonna need to deploy it to the new environment. So Azure Resource Manager offers a template-driven, declarative way for your deployment. It basically can model all your resources in a JSON file with a nice structure. And one of the goals we're trying to do for deployment is make it idempotent. So that means you can use the same template to deploy over and over again, so it have the same effect. And besides the initial provisioning, we also you can also use the same templates through the whole life cycle. For example, you can update a configuration through a template, and the simplest thing you just need to do is to do a redeployment with the new configuration. And one other thing to mention is that the templates can work across different services and different regions. And also, you can extend it. You can use a modular way for the template. For example, if you have a 3-tier application that have a front end, middle tier, and you have your back end, you can use 3 templates for different layer, and then you can use a master template to chain this whole thing together for your whole deployment. So now let's look at what are the ways you can do with Azure Resource Manager in terms of deployment. So the first approach you can do is use the imperative way for deployment. Basically, these are sending individual REST API to us through different channels. So the example shows you can use a new Azure VM, a new Azure storage account, new web VNet configuration. So those gonna be result in different REST API to Azure Resource Manager. And then you will create a VM, storage account, config individually. The one thing you have to pay attention to is you become the orchestrator of your own deployment. You have to handle errors and different branches in your script. The other way we recommend more is the declarative way, which I just talked about. You use a JSON file. If you look at the schema, so we have parameters, variables, resources, and outputs. The parameters are the ones you want to how do you want to customize your deployment. It can include the name or your password or your settings for your deployment. To be noticed, since your template can be reused in the future, so you want to expose the management unit from the parameters. And another important part is the resources. It basically lists all the resources that you have in your application. So usually you will say, oh, there's my VMs, my storage accounts, my SQL databases, etc. And then the outputs allows you to output the most important information to your client after deployment. So the most thing we say is like after deployment, you output the endpoints for how do you access the data plane. Then the next thing I want to show you is how does the deployment work. So when you write such a template and you use a PowerShell or other tools to submit the deployment to Azure Resource Manager, so we first analyze what are the things in the template from a resource in the resource section, and then we put individual resource creation results. We try to gain the maximum parallel execution, and then we will put them into in a job table, and then a backend worker will run the jobs one by one. So, and on your side, you can use a get deployment command to track the template execution. One thing to be noted that the template deployment must be created within a resource group. And we also allow nested deployment, but those are all in the same resource group. Because later I will introduce what is a resource group. Largely, it stands for your application. So this slide shows what the template looks like. So it has several parts. So the first part is the schema. So it is stored in a well-known location. If you are using any tool like a regular JSON editor to draft the template, you can put this on as your validation file, and then it will validate your entire schema. And then there's a content version for your version control. Parameters, we have talked about it. Variables is something you can use in your resource definition. Things like, for example, if customer give you a username, password, and in some places in your resource definition, you need to combine them into a connection string. And you can use variable to combine different parameters with different other strings and reuse it in the resources definition. And resources, which are the most important thing we have talked about, same for the outputs. So now let me give you a demo on how to use Visual Studio to create a template, and then I'll also show you how you can view the template you deployed. Okay, so
while Mike's loading that up, just to kind of recap that really quickly, templates are extremely powerful. When you think about this in the context of being a CSP provider, you're bringing a customer into Azure. You have some kind of intellectual property, and you're providing service to them for Azure that has made it a compelling reason for them to do business with you, and let's say, and as opposed to another CSP partner or going direct. How do you do this in a repetitive fashion that's consistent? That's where templates are super powerful and very important, because you can define what it is that you're doing for a customer in a template, and you can use that like a cookie cutter time and time again. So think of this as, this is the factory floor that you have to deliver Azure within CSP. And we're not talking about building cars by hand. This is just like what Ford invented, essentially, where you have an assembly line. And so as you see these demonstrations and we look at templates and resource groups and policies and everything along the lines, think of it as your assembly line to delivering managed services on CSP.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. So now let me go with the demo. So you have to install Visual Studio and Azure SDK. Then you will be able to create a new project type called resource group deployments here. So I'm just using the default name. And then it will ask you what type of resource you want to start with. So here, like you can see, we have VM, DB, web app. So let's start with a blank template. So the template will create some scripts and some templates. So the script is how Visual Studio use PowerShell to deploy to Azure. So the script is same for every project. If you want to read it, you can read the whole content. The most interesting for us is this file, is Azure deploy file. So it automatically generates a blank template with parameter, variable, resources, outputs. And now we can actually add a resource. When you add a resource, it gives you some nice UI for you to select what resource you want and give it a name. So just for simplicity, let's do a storage account. So imagine you have a 3-tier application. This is your backend storage. So you give the name to backend storage. But the name is identifying like what is the component in your storage, in your whole application instead of the actual name. So let's try to edit. So what it does, it is adding a resource in the resource definition part. So here we can look, it added Microsoft.storage storage account, and the name user variable, and the account type becomes a parameter. So if we look back at the parameter section, we can see it actually automatically generate a backend storage type as a parameter. So what it means is when you start to provision, you can select what type of SKU for your storage. And similarly, if I want to add a VM, so let me try to add a simple Linux VM. I'll give it a name. For example, this is my mid-tier. And you will use the backend storage, and you also use the network. So I selected create a new network. I'll give it my backend internal network. I'll just give the name, and I'll just add them. So now you can see more resources are added. One is the internal network I added, and then is the network interfaces that for the VM and the virtual machine itself. So this gives you a very easy way for you to start learning how template works. And then there is a famous website that you can upload this template to the website, and it will show you how what are the relationship between each resources. So today I'm not gonna demo that, but you can definitely find yourself. So the next thing I want to show you is, so template is not just for provisioning, the initial provisioning. You can use across your life cycle. So here, for example, this is a project I previously created and deployed. I'll show you what the results look like now. So let's go to my demo resource group, and let's find the storage account I just deployed. So you can see here, the replication type is LRS, local redundant storage. Now I'm gonna try to use the same template with different configuration to do a redeployment. So the thing we're gonna see is we want to convert this from LRS to a GRS. So now let's do the deployment. So you click the project and you do a deployment. So make sure we selected a demo resource group, and then we can edit the parameters. So let's change this to a GRS, and then we'll hit the deploy button. So it will output the progress. So first, what Visual Studio does is first check whether the template is good to go, and then it will just submit it to Azure Resource Manager. So here from the output, you can see it successfully deployed the template to the resource group. So now let's go back to this. I'll just refresh. So you can see here, what I'm highlighting is the replication type is converted from LRS to GRS. So imagine this is your whole application. And then you have certain important things you want to change as your configuration. So the parameter file is the place you want to expose those knobs. And then when after the initial deployment, you can change it by just doing a simple redeployment. So now let's see. Another thing is I want to show you is export template. So there are a couple of ways you can see your template. The first way is to capture a running resource group to see what's are the resources there. And then the portal has a way to show you what are the templates of the resources you have if you want to do a redeployment. So you look at the resources, and then it will look at the schema of the resource, and it automatically generates a template. So here you can see we have very similar thing as we inputted. But one different thing is it actually captures the name of storage accounts as a parameter instead of the account type. So this is with this the way you can do templates. You can first create a resource in imperative way, and then you do a capture, export the template to a template you can modify and reuse. So that's a very quick way for you to learn templates. The other thing we can say is to look at the exact template we submitted for deployment. For example, here we just submitted to convert this from LRS to a GRS. So this is the template we use for that deployment. So you can see this is identical as the template we submitted. And then if we go to the parameters, we can see these are the SKUs. This is the same as our previous template. Let's go to the parameter section. So firstly, we are using a standard LRS here. So it will output you. It will also show you what you can do to submit this template using different tools. Like this is an example: CLI, PowerShell, and .NET. Okay, so that's the demo for templates. So let's move on. So once you have the things you deploy, and you end up with a lot of resources, and then you're gonna think about how do I get visibility to what assets do I have in Azure. So Azure Resource Manager offers you two major ways for organizing your resource. So the first way is resource group. So imagine this, stands for your application, and it can include a bunch of resources. I'll talk in more detail in a bit. And the second thing is about tags. So you can put tags on any resource group or resources, and then you can later look at them by tags. Now let's drill down to what is a resource group. So a resource group is a container for multiple resources. It usually, in practical, it stands for your application. It can also stand for a tier in your application that share the same life cycle. So an example of that is, usually if we have a 3-tier application, if it always share the same life cycle, meaning you always deploy, delete it, update them together, then you can put them in a single resource group. However, if your 3-tier application share, like different tiers share different life cycle, for example, for your data tier, you always want to keep them, but for your other tiers, you can update them, delete them, stop them individually. Then it makes sense for you to put them into multiple resource groups. One of the things we see a lot is a lot of enterprises, they put their network resources into in one other resource group. And then the rest part, like the VM, the storage, they put into other resource group because they are using a shared network infrastructure. And one resource can only exist in one and only one resource group. A resource group, of course, can span regions. If you want, you have a application that you want to deploy into different data centers, and it also spans services. The resource group, you imagine this is your application, is a unit for provisioning, management, and access control. So the next thing is about tags. So tags is a name-value pair assigned to resources or resource group. So you can use subscription-wide taxonomy. And each resource, you can have up to 15 tags. And what you can do with tags is you filter resource by tags. You can filter billing by tags. So tags offers you a great way to organize your resource, but only if people use tag accordingly. Later, I'll show you in the control pillar what we do to enforce a tag. So let me give you a few examples of tags. So a lot of the examples we see from real customers is they use environment, role, application name, department, or responsible party for tags. You imagine these are the metadata. You use tags as the metadata to describe your resources. So when you look at your resources, you exactly understand who are using this and what is used for, and then which department is paying for the bill. So that's how you use tags. So we have talked about deployment and how to organize your resource. The next thing I'm going to show you is about control. What is control? We have heard a lot from customers that Azure gives them great flexibility. You can provision all kinds of resources you want, but they're concerned about like the control previously they had in their on-premise world. So before they have a lot of ways to implement IT policies to have very granular access control, and they can understand exactly what happened in their environment using all kinds of tools. So we are aiming to provide great access control to your cloud environment. So while you are enjoying the flexibility and agility of Azure, you are also confident that you are in full control of your environment. There are three things we have mainly for the control pillar. So the first is called role-based access control. The second is resource policy. And then is audit logs. So let's go from RBAC. So role-based access control allows secure access with granular permissions. So imagine this your shared folder. You can assign different permissions to different users. So similar here, you can assign very granular permissions to users, group, and service principals. So users groups are mainly for people who want to have an interactive session with Azure Resource Manager, and service principal is mainly for automation. And you can assign permissions to them equally. And there are lots of built-in roles like owner, reader, contributor, VM contributor, DB admin. Those are all built-in rules that make it very easy to get started. And there are also customer roles offer great flexibility. So imagine you have a scenario where you just want certain people to react to incidents by restarting your instances. So you can define a role that only have permission to restart VM. So there are two key concepts we should understand when we use RBAC. So the first thing is about role definition. So it describes the set of permissions, like read permission, write permission, or other custom actions. So you put all the actions as a role. So for example, you can have a DB admin, so you will have access, write, read access to all your DB resources. And then you can assign them into different roles. So role assignment is associate role definition with the identity at the scope. So you can say Mike is a DB admin for this resource group only. So previously we have talked about resource group is a unit of management. So here you can the scope can be a resource group. And also we support subscription scope and the resource scope as well, just for give you great flexibility. And one other thing to mention, the permissions are inherited. So subscription assignment will apply for all resource group and all the resources, for example. So this diagram.
Sorry, Mike. For those of you that were in Module 2 that Iran gave on Azure AD, there were two core concepts there specific to Azure AD as it relates to CSP. One was that your Azure AD as a CSP partner, you have admin agents and you have help desk agents. Now, the admin agents are owners. So as Mike continues through here, you are an owner at the subscription level. For Azure, the help desk agent role within Partner Center is not mapped to an individual role. It's available at the subscription level and down. You can choose to assign a contributor, owner, reader, one of the individual contributor roles, or even custom roles. So that's kind of that first concept. The second one is the customer. So when you look at your customers, you have the option of giving them owner rights to their Azure subscriptions, contributor, reader, variations of contributor roles, or custom. If you think about this in the context of infrastructure as a service, if you're just selling them IaaS, you could very well decide that you only want to grant them virtual machine contributor, network contributor, storage contributor, and reader. And that would only give them the ability to manage, procure, VM type services. And so as we continue through here, think about it in those two contexts. One is you're either admin agent or you're a help desk agent. Help desk agent, you can choose what level you want to assign your help desk personnel. And then the other side of that is what level of access are you giving your customers as you look at RBAC?
Okay, thanks, Andrew. So this graph shows you different level of scopes. So there's the subscription, there's the resource group, and there's the resources. And you can also look at the major three roles we have, which is contributor, owner, and reader. The readers are very easy to understand. You only have read actions. You cannot do any writes. A lot of questions got to me is what are the differences between contributor and owner? If you go to the RBAC UI in Azure Portal and you click the permissions for contributor and owner, you can see the only difference that the owner have more permission is on Microsoft authorization namespace, which allows them to delegate, make role assignment, make role definition, and to make policies. Those are very high privilege actions that only the administrator should be able to do. So that's RBAC. So to recap, RBAC is really giving user what permissions they need for their job. Now let's move on to another thing you can use for control purpose. So which is resource policy. So we just GA'd policy in mid-April. So it is targeting at several scenarios. So previously we talked about RBAC, which give you permissions, can give who what they can do. And resource policies, on the other hand, controls what are the shape of your resources. So the scenario it can be used is like for chargeback, you may want to enforce a department tax or some other tax for third-party management tool integration. So you can enforce a tag. When there's no such tag, you can deny the request, or you can, when there's no such tag, you can append the tag if needed to function. Second scenario is geo-compliance. Those are usually we hear from like banks and very big enterprise who have compliance requirements. Like some of the resources can only be in certain regions, for example. And service curation, you can select the service catalog you can have. For example, you can say I only want VM network storage IP addresses in my environment. Naming conventions. So sometimes you want to have a good naming convention for all your resources. So this is the way you can set a naming conventions. Cost control. So you can restrict the SKUs such as VM sizes, storage account type. So basically covers most major resource types. You can see I can only create standard A0, A1 virtual machines for this particular scope. And then it's a service catalog. You can restrict the VM image you can use. And also it has some, you can enforce certain best practice for configuration. So similarly as RBAC, so there are policy definitions and policy assignments. So policy definition is kind of describing what your results look like, and the policy assignment allows you to assign the policy definition to a particular scope. So similarly, the scope can be your subscription, your resource group, and your individual resource. One thing to be noted is that the policy are a default allow system, which means once the user have permission granted by RBAC, and then he can, without policy, he can do anything he can do for like whenever he has permission. But if you have a policy, then his permission is sort of restricted. So that's what we mean by a default allow system. So let's take a look at a quick sample of what a policy looks like. So here is a sample that's targeting at virtual machines. So it restricts your VM SKU, VM size to just standard A0 and standard A1. So here you can see is the schema start with the if, and then it defines your conditions. What are your rules when you want to do a deny? So you can use a logical operator as all of, any of, or not. And you can also use a condition like with a field and equals or in. So that can help you to compare, do different type of comparison. And then basically you can define the effect you want. So the most common one is deny, so that which will fail your request. So once you have this policy in a particular scope, whenever a request comes, we will look at whether the SKU of the VM is standard A0 or standard A1. If it is not in this two, so we will deny the request. So other effects are audit and append. The audit is meaning it will still allow the request, but what it does is it will issue a special event, audit event in audit logs. So this is, I'll do a demo for this later. But this shows you how you can enforce policies, and you can use similar structure to enforce all the scenarios I mentioned in the previous slide. So the next powerful thing is audit log. So audit log basically journals all write, delete, and actions. So this records all the things on the unmanaged plane side that happens to modify your resources. So it is in a central location, so you can, for API and UI, you can view, and you also have a very common format. One thing we recently shipped in build is that alert rule. So you can define an alert based on the audit log events. You can, for example, you can look at the policy failures, and then you can trigger an email notification to your administrator, or you can trigger a webhook. And by default, audit log only give you access to 3 months data, but if you want more, you can export it to storage account or event hub. So by exporting to storage account, you will write the same data into your storage account. For Event Hub, you can use the Event Hub API to subscribe to particular events, and then you can do a lot of automation and mitigation by yourself. Okay, so we have talked about RBAC, policy, and audit log. So let me give you a quick demo on this. So let's first take a look at policy. So here is a prototype tool we have for policy. As you can see here, I have a lot of policy defined for my subscription. Today I only want to show you this, which is the storage account SKU policy. Let's take here. Let's look at the policy. The policy is saying for my storage account, if the SKU is not LRS or GRS, basically it's the standard, must be the standard SKU for my, for example, for my development only. But for my production, I may have a different policy to restrict it to premium only. So, and then I have the assignment to a particular resource group, which is called policy for demo purpose. So now, since we have this policy, let's do a deployment. So we can use the same templates, and then let's do a deployment to the policy resource group. So let's make sure we select policies here. And then when we edit the parameter, we'll choose the premium one and do a save or do a deploy. So what we're expecting here is a failure from Azure Resource Manager saying, oh, this is not allowed by your policy. Let's take a look. So what it tells me is the template failed. And then if we look at the error messages, it will say this is allowed by the policy you had, which I'm highlighting here. So you can see this is the storage account SKU policy I just had. So if we remove the policy, then we can do this type of deployment. So now let's take a look at audit log. So it has a very simple UI. So you can filter by your subscriptions and like by time range. So here you can see the just now one. When I do the deployment, it failed. I will tell you why it failed. So you can see what fails is here. Look at the Microsoft authorization one. You can say it is disallowed by certain policies. Here. Yeah. And one thing I just talked about is export. So export, you can do your configuration. So now I already configured to a storage account called FDAEX. So let's take a look at that storage account. So I want to show you what is the format for audio log. So let's go here. Let's go to, so you can see this is the inside operation logs, and it will give you results to all your subscriptions. Then it will give you the year, the month, organizing them by daily. And you can see which hour you are looking at, which minute you are looking at. And then it will give you a JSON file. So if we download this and then view it, where is it? Oh, it opens up Visual Studio. Okay, here we go. So as you can see, the audio log gives you the exact timestamp, resource ID, and what is the operation name, category, etc. So all the information you can use for auditing or troubleshooting purposes. So the next thing I want to show you is about RBAC. So RBAC, for example, here I want to look at who have access to my subscription. So here I have 2 subscriptions. So I'll just go to my MSDN one. So here is a little icon for access. So if you click it, you can see who are the users and what are the roles they have. So you can see here I have my personal account as an owner. So if we go here, we can see, oh, I have an owner role. And these are the permissions. So the permissions are organized by namespaces. So you can see here I have all the permission in all the namespace. So if you select one, for example, if we go to Microsoft authorization, so you can see we have management log, all the permission for management logs, and then you can read permission for permissions, and you can do read and write for role alignment and role definition. So if you click it, it will give you more detail about what exactly the permissions do you have. And what other thing I previously showed you is the difference between contributor and owner. So if we click the roles, you can see all kind of built-in roles we have. And if you go to the contributor and go to the permissions, you scroll through this, you can see the only thing different is Microsoft authorization. Because it only have read permission to role definition and role alignment, which is exactly why you're not an admin. Only the administrator has the permission to delegate, to grant permissions. Okay, so just to do a quick recap. So for access control and to gain more control for your cloud environments, we have major 3 ways. One is RBAC. The second one is resource policy, and also the audio log can help you to understand what happened in your environment. So the last slides are basically a few linkers to template deployment for you to get started. We have IAS examples on GitHub called Azure Quick-Start Templates. They have a lot of templates you can use out of the box. And also, if you want to learn about the languages, you can build our documentation on ACOM. And also, there are a lot of examples in the different GitHub from this deck. And yeah, that's my basically what I want to cover today. So we have another 10 minutes for Q&A.
Thanks, Mike. I've unmuted the audience. Your phone is still muted, but you have the ability to unmute yourself. Sounds kind of silly. Anyways, if you have questions, please put them into the conversation or unmute your phone and let us know. Great job today, Mike.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we'll be on here for a couple minutes. Module 5 begins in about 9 minutes. That'll be on business continuity and disaster recovery. I pasted the information into the conversation window there if you don't have that readily available. Well, it looks like we do have a question. Mike, the question is there a sample code to programmatically provision an Azure VM using a CSP customer's Azure subscription? Yeah, so I
Okay.
think that maybe is a little nuanced. There's nothing special per se about a CSP customer Azure subscription. Templates, policies, RBAC, tags, those are only available in ARM, and a CSP Azure subscription is only available in ARM. So, Mike, I know that Visual Studio works with CSP, and I don't know if you have any other color or context to that.
Yeah, I think basically it is using ARM. It's no different as other other type of subscriptions. And there are a couple of ways you can do programmatically. You can use the .NET SDK. You can also use your PowerShell script, CLI, etc. Depending on whether you want to make it interactively or non-interactive. So if you want to make it non-interactive, you can use service principal and use certain authentication. And then you can call the REST APIs.
Thanks. I think we definitely are doing that, but there were a couple of steps that has to be done by executing a PowerShell or something after the subscription is provisioned.
Yeah,
like creating an app in the Azure Active Directory, and then getting the app ID, etc., before we can use that to provision VMs, right? So, is there a way to automate that for CSP customers Azure subscriptions?
No, to be clear, I mean, you don't have to do anything with Azure AD. If you can step into Partner Center on day one. You can create a customer. You can add an Azure subscription from the UI of Partner Center. You can go to the Azure Management Portal and start working on Azure. You can bring a template into the Azure portal. You can open PowerShell and you can log into an Azure RM subscription. You use the -tenant switch and provide their on Microsoft.com domain for their Azure AD, but you don't have to do anything in Azure AD to make that stuff work. The work that you would do in Azure AD would be when you turn on an API. So when you turn on the Partner Center API or the Legacy Crest API, that's when you would have a little Azure AD work to get some things to work. If you decide to use Partner Center Explorer, not CSP Explorer, but the Partner Center Explorer that Isaiah presented in Module 1 today, that does have the capability for you to define a template and deploy templates to your customers from that portal. Outside of that, there's nothing that Microsoft has provided that you can't use today or that requires extra Azure AD work.
Sure. So we missed the first session or the Module 1 session today. Is there a way we would get access to those sessions or recordings?
Yes, sir. Every session is being recorded, and we will get those to all of the attendees.
Great. Thanks.
Just to follow up on the question that Arvind posted, we were able to get this to work just by using PowerShell. By what you basically mentioned, log in with the global admin credentials and using the tenant ID of the end customer, and then deploying a resource file. Now we want to convert this into an API to be able to run in our application. So we were wondering, is there a way to do this entire step without using PowerShell? Like be able to log in the context of another tenant ID and then use the REST endpoints, I guess, to deploy a resource?
Yes, you want to deploy a template via the Azure REST API?
Not just that, be able to do it for an end customer for a different.
The Azure REST API
So
does support CSP, so you can provide the tenant when you invoke that API. Mike, can you explain deploying templates via the REST API?
Yeah, basically, if you use Fiddler to intercept the calls from when you do PowerShell, you can exactly say what PowerShell does. Basically, for template deployment, it's put the template together with the parameter file to Azure Microsoft resource deployments. That's how you do it in the REST API.
Okay. And you pass in the tenant ID to that REST API?
When you do the deployment, you will have to specify what is the subscription ID you want to deploy to and the resource group.
Okay. And is there any kind of, since we are deploying for an end customer, is there anything else we have to do prior to that in terms of having authorization, or since being a CSP, we would automatically be able to deploy it for an end customer?
So my understanding is as a CSP, you get the administrator permission for the customer subscription, and then I think you're saying you use your own credential to deploy into customer subscription, right? Then I don't think you need to do anything else.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you have a credential in your Azure AD that you use to log into Partner Center with, if that credential is granted admin agent in Partner Center, you are an owner to all of your customers' Azure CSP subscriptions. And you can use that account to log into the Azure portal for those subscriptions directly. You can use that account to do the same thing with PowerShell, the cross-platform CLI, and the REST API.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing to mention, if you want to make this fully automation, you should create a service principal and AD application in AAD, and then assign kind of enough permission to the service principal, and then you can use a search to authenticate with the Azure Resource Manager to do the deployment. So that's enable a non-interactive session.
Right, and we did follow one of the tutorials that we found online to do that, and we were authenticating using the token credentials and the Microsoft Azure SDK. We just couldn't figure out a way to change the subscription ID or pass in another, it always got deployed under the subscription of the admin agent, which is the distributor. So, but yeah, I mean, we can, we'll try further and see if we can get it to work.
It should be possible.
If you can send an email to the Azure CSP Accelerate distribution list, we'll see if we can't get you in contact with somebody. Just let us know, what country your CSP agreement is out of that you're working on. I put the email address in the conversation for you.
We did not use the REST endpoint. We use the client.deployments.create or update the SDK. I don't know if you're familiar with that, to deploy a resource file. So I don't know if that's the right approach, or we should directly use the graph endpoints, I believe, and call them to deploy.
Well, so CSP has progressed through its initial delivery, and the CREST APIs are considered legacy now. Now we have the Partner Center APIs, And with that, though, there are certain things that are still only available in Crest that haven't been ported into the newer API sets. So send an email to the email address I posted in the conversation history there, and give us some details. Specifically include what country the CSP agreement's out of as well, so that we make sure that that team is aware of what's going on, and we can help navigate you in the appropriate direction.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and